Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tan and I'm here with Lyngso, and we've got another Master Gardener class today presented by Lisa and Kathleen. Today we're going to be talking about vegetable gardening, and we're going to get the presentation up and running in just about a minute here. Just some housekeeping tips. Go ahead and write in your questions via chat, and we'll address them towards the end of the class. Until then, just keep the questions coming, and we'll go ahead and pick some questions or most of the questions at the end, and we'll address them. Lisa, Kathleen, are you ready? Shall we get started here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start. It's not going to look perfect, but I'm not going to press play because that kind of messes me up.
Okay, sounds good. Alrighty, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we know everybody's pretty zoomed out, so we really do appreciate you showing up. Kathleen, I don't know if we went through it anyway. She's been a Master Gardener for a long time. I've been a Master Gardener for a long time. We're the product of two farmers, and my mom was a Master Gardener and all her sisters are Master Gardeners. And Kathleen's also an ISA certified arborist and a professional vegetable gardener, and I'm her assistant. So we both do professional orchard and vegetable care. So,
and Lisa's also a master composter.
Yeah, and soil is my lifeblood. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to cover today, Kathleen's going to go over, we're in the third year of a drought. I think arguably, with climate change, we can't really count on winter rains the way we used to. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. What is dry farming, drought tolerant vegetables, and then I'm going to go into methods of how to save some water and go into some tips and techniques. And then Kathleen and I will be chiming in. And as Can said, we're happy to, Can will monitor the chat room, and we're happy to answer your questions. At the end of the presentation, if you have clarification, Can obviously interrupt us. So Kathleen, with that, I'm going to let you go ahead and go.
Okay. So in doing my research for this class, I just looked up drought, and you can see half of the country is in a drought this year. You can go to the next slide. And the West, it's way, way worse. We are in severe drought. California, even far northern California, which you would think get some rain, they're not. They're in a moderate drought, and we are in severe drought. Wow. So just, everybody needs to keep that in mind when they plant and how they plant and what they plant.
Yeah.
And how they water.
Yeah. And this has nothing to do with vegetable gardens, but I was talking to my friends about the drought, how we're in a drought. And one of my friends piped up and said, oh, well, I know a great way to save water. I just shower at the gym instead of showering at home. And I'm like, you see, so that kind of doesn't work.
Yeah.
We're kind of all in this together. And you can see from this map, the entire state of California is in severe to exceptional drought. So
yeah, which brings up a good point that even growing vegetables, you're going to use some water probably to grow your vegetables. It's still less water for you to grow them yourself than to buy them in the store.
Yeah. Because
there's way more water in the whole processing, and the farmers don't farm for drought. They farm for production. So even though it is going to cost you some water, it's less water overall for the big picture.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. All right.
So what is dry farming? Dry farming is you do not irrigate. You water probably once when you plant it, because that little seedling won't survive unless it it gets a good watering, but then you don't water again. And well, that's the next slide. But some of the features of dry farmed produce is they taste way better. In fact, most people cut water to their tomatoes at a certain point, which Lisa will get into. You can keep farming even if there is a drought. You won't have as many weeds because the weeds aren't going to be able to germinate and grow because they don't have water. And I think most important is your roots are going to go down really deep to find water. And in the process of doing that, they're going to extract nutrients that if it was a normally irrigated year, like you watered every 4th day or something, your roots wouldn't go down so deep. So they go down and they get nutrients that it makes your produce taste better, and it's also more nutrient dense because of that.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in here. So Kathleen has a photo of UC Santa Cruz's dry farm tomatoes. Dry farming does work better coastside than it does east of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So I did try this because we gave this same class about almost exactly a month ago. So I went ahead and I planted some tomatoes just in my garden where I have some wildflowers growing. And I watered them once and I didn't water them again and they all died. So if you're coastside, I probably could have gotten away with that because you just don't get as hot. I'm in Portola Valley, Kathleen's in Santa Cruz. They just don't get as hot coastside and they have a lot more fog. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about later about a hybrid between dry farming and normally what we would give. So you just have to keep, if you are in the hottest part of Redwood City, it's going to be really hard to dry farm.
Yeah, but you can water less.
Exactly.
And to Lisa's point, the dry farming, the whole kind of dry farm tomato movement started in Davenport, which is about 10 miles north of Santa Cruz, right on the coast. So it is we're much more temperate here. We don't get your heat waves. We might get a day of heat, but then the fog comes in. So that's a very good point, Lisa.
Yeah.
And dry farming also doesn't work if you have really sandy soil. I know everybody complains that their soil is, heavy clay, but heavy clay soil actually holds on to moisture and nutrients way better than a fast draining soil like sandy soil. I used to be in San Francisco in the Sunset, and I had to water all the time because the water just ran through my ground so quickly. So, soil is very important, and organic matter in your soil is vital. But if you can see the picture over here on the right of your screen, you want to plant your tomatoes as deep as you can because that's where the moisture is.
Yeah, and you can just pinch off those bottom leaves and it'll root, and so it's going to get every little drop of water that's in that soil. It can hold on to.
Yeah. So before we had all of our dams and hetchy and, water everywhere, California was dry farmed. It's probably more than 100 years ago now. And unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge has been lost. So there is now a movement towards dry farming again. But there's not a lot of research being done on it because the farmers don't pay as much for water, is my opinion. That's my own private opinion that I just made public. But, there's just not a lot of research on dry farming right now. Some farmers are trying to start it. I think as the cost of water increases, we'll see more better use of water. I drive down to Monterey quite often, and even I drive the coast, and you just see overhead sprays going all over the place. So we're gonna have to get smarter with how we use our water.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so this is a book, it's interesting. In my research, most of the research on dry farming is from turn of the century.
Wow.
The last century, from the 1910s, 15s, you know,
Yeah.
around then. And I love this quote. To meet with the greatest success, the farmer must unlearn what he knows about farming. Which means your plants aren't going to look great, but they should do, especially if a modified dry farm. So you're going to just water less. Your plants won't look, you know, super green and super healthy, but you're going to get great produce and it's going to be very tasty.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are some vegetables that work for dry farming and others don't. The winter and spring vegetables, lettuce, most of the stuff in the broccoli family, cauliflower, cabbage, you can't dry farm them. They need water. They've evolved to be spring and winter vegetables, and that's when we get rain typically. So they don't do well. In fact, they would die if you tried to dry farm them. But there's a lot you can dry farm. Artichokes, beans, corn, which was a surprise to me, eggplant, garlic, okra, melons, potatoes, strawberries, tomatoes, winter squash, and zucchini. And the beans, bush beans and climbing beans both do fine in drought. And there's some pictures. The one in the middle is Gabon's beans, I believe.
Right.
And they can all survive with way less water than we typically give them. Corn, the early varieties do better. Your production may decrease some, but you know, they'll be drought stressed, but they'll still produce.
Yeah.
Eggplant, the smaller the fruit, the better your production will be, which is kind of a good rule for all of this dry farming stuff. Is the smaller fruit does better than, you know, if you want to grow a pumpkin for the pumpkin festival in Half Moon Bay that weighs a ton or however big they get, 800 pounds, that's not going to be a dry farmed pumpkin. That pumpkin got a lot of water. So, you know, just keep in mind, the smaller the fruit, the better it will do with less water. Melons, again, get the littler melons. There's some great choices for melons, and they're not going to be super like juicy, dripping down your face juicy, but the flavor will be outstanding.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say, Kathleen, I mean, we're now in June, and a lot of these things you would have planted back in April.
Yeah.
It's not too late for almost everything you just went through. I'm just looking at my master gardener list here. My planting chart. I mean, it's not too late to plant some of these things if you haven't planted them. But one thing with water, if you're trying to really reduce your water, if you get them in the ground while we still have cooler temperatures, and this year we had a lot of rain in April.
Yeah.
That's then doing all the work for you, and they get well established and their roots get well established before it gets so hot. I think the reason why my dry farm tomatoes didn't work, well, for one thing, I planted them like 2 days before we had that super hot.
Yeah.
We went up to 96 and nothing. I mean, you know, of course they weren't going to make that. But had I planted those same tomatoes maybe a month earlier, they might have been able to withhold that heat that we had. This class is a tiny bit late for trying to get to dry farm, but all the things you can use next year.
Yeah. And, you know, so you have to water them well for the first 3 weeks if you plant them today.
Right,
then you can cut back on the water.
right. Do you want to go back to melons?
No, I think we got it.
Okay.
And you guys will get these slides. Can will send them to you. Strawberries, the Seascape, which tastes great. I know those personally. The Ogallala, they sound delicious. I haven't eaten them, but those two strawberries are the best for less water. And the middle picture shows how well they're mulched, which is also important. And Lisa's going to get into that.
Next.
Yep. Tomatoes. Smaller tomatoes are better. All of the girls, there's new girl, dirty girl,
Early girl. Early girl.
early girl. They all do well. And dirty girl is the one that Davenport developed, the farm up in Davenport developed for their dry farm. But any small fruit and anyone that has a fast or a less days to maturity is a good choice because they don't last as long.
Yeah.
And winter squash, you can do all the winter squash, and I just listed all the delicious winter squash which you would plant. You could plant them today, but you're getting pretty late to plant. Winter squash are stored in the winter but grown in the summer.
Yeah.
But you could grow pretty much any winter squash. The delicata would probably be a great choice.
Yeah, because it's so
Fairly
small.
small.
Yeah. I will say I always June 1st is where I plant my Halloween pumpkins. I get a late October pumpkin you would plant June 1st.
Yeah.
But that
And
doesn't have anything to do with drought tolerant.
The buttercup is a new variety that's really quite delicious.
Oh, is that a small butternut squash?
No, you would think so. It's
Oh. It's like a kabocha.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's yummy.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you want a zucchini, Dark Star. Unfortunately, I have not found Dark Star in the nurseries. So you would need to buy seeds. And you're obviously too late to do it this year, but
Yeah.
Dark Star it was actually developed for drought tolerance.
You know, they're saying on the UC Master Gardener that you could still seed. I did just the other day seeded some zucchini.
Yeah.
So it might not be too late to go. You know, zucchini, a little bit like beans, it keeps producing, and the more you harvest, the more it produces, but it does kind of peter out after a couple of months. So it's something that you could maybe even buy a plant now. If you can find Dark Star, you would for sure be able to find seeds for Dark Star. Seed one and plant one, and then you'll have zucchini all season.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay. Oh, this is you.
Yep. And this is just showing how the roots follow the water down, and the last, little seedling, big plant. And it just shows how those roots are going down, following the water. And as it follows the water, it's also getting nutrients that normally it wouldn't go to get.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's just an example of a planting chart for dry farming that you could use.
All right. Okay, I'm going to go into then some methods and tips. So I started, we both started researching this because we were asked to teach this class and we hadn't taught the class before. And the main thing that popped out to me, and that's why the little surprise baby is there, is Kathleen and I have been teaching vegetable classes for years and years. And what we talk about most isn't vegetables. What we talk about is soil and keeping your soil alive and healthy. And how do you keep your soil alive and healthy? And that's by giving it compost, covering it with mulch, and cover cropping. That's how you keep your soil alive. Well, come to find out, and we were always talking in terms of feeding the soil. Feed the soil, not the plant. Well, when I started doing research for this class of vegetable gardening and drought, my little mind exploded because it's the exact same, whether you're feeding the soil or watering the soil, it's the same thing. You're watering the soil. Don't water the plant, water the soil. And kind of what do I mean by that? And it comes down to some techniques. The biggest technique, well, there's three main things, and that's adding compost, mulching that soil, and growing a cover crop. When you do those three things, you will increase by a huge magnitude the infiltration of the water, the infiltration going down to the root system. And you'll also, growing a cover crop or mulching, you're going to cover that soil up, and you're going to keep that soil cool and it's covered, and you're going to greatly reduce your evaporation. So it just was amazing to me that the exact same thing you're doing to feed your soil and keep that soil alive, you're doing the exact same technique. You water your soil, don't water the plant. Keep that soil moist, evenly moist. And you can see we've now shifted. Kathleen was talking about dry farming. I'm talking about if you're not going to dry farm, what's in your tool chest that you can use to use less water or use the water you have more efficiently.
And just to emphasize Lisa's point, I was at one of my clients, and she has one bed that I've kind of neglected because it's in the shade and you can't really grow much in it. But I planted some lettuce and some herbs, and I'm irrigating it. I turned the irrigation on to run for 10 minutes every day. And I went back a week later and it's bone dry. And that soil isn't mulched, and I haven't put compost in that bed for probably 2 years. And that soil is like a rock, and the water is just going straight down through it. It's not getting to the plant roots at all. And it's because I've neglected that soil. If that soil was good and healthy, 10 minutes a day of drip irrigation every single day, that soil should be just like, I should be able to squeeze water out of it if I took a handful of that soil.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the case. So over the next slides, cover cropping might be a new term for some of you. So it's just a living mulch, but we're going to go into depth about that. We're going to go talk about plant cooperation and planting techniques, irrigation systems, drip, hand watering, how to water, when to water. And then we're also going to talk a lot about water infiltration and getting that water where it needs to be, which is in the rhizosphere, into the roots for that plant. Talk about compost, mulching, light fluffy soil, decreased compaction. And also for my own personal garden, I'm lucky to live on a little bit bigger piece of property. I have all California natives that I don't put one drop of water. The entire I do not water them. So if I'm going to water something, I need to be able to eat it. I'm just not going to put water on something that I can't eat. So we're going to talk about that, like garden size, how much water do you want to use? So kind of what allotment do you allow yourself? We'll talk about raised beds versus in the ground, and then some tips of where to get some hidden water, some just things that I personally use, and I'm very happy to hear ideas from you guys. And then I put together my Lisa hierarchy. And this is just in my mind when I'm out in my garden. This is what I'm thinking. I would rather have an edible over an ornamental. I'd rather have an ornamental over a weed, but I would take a weed over mulched ground. I would take mulched ground over bare ground, and I would take bare ground over cement. So that's my,
But
that's,
if you have bare ground, you probably have cement,
yeah, they're one and the same.
pretty much.
Because we've seen people, we've go on garden consultations, and if you're blowing your soil and you're blowing all the mulch off of your soil, I can guarantee you that soil is dead, and that soil is like cement. And you try, especially this time of year, you trying to work that soil, you would probably need a jackhammer to work that soil, because you don't have any living roots in that soil. So, and one thing I want to say, and I know weeding is a little bit of a personal choice, and I know it's third in my hierarchy here, but the little microbes who are living in that soil that you're trying to feed and keep alive, they don't really care. A root's a root to them. They just want roots, because that's how they get their nutrients, and that's how they survive, is through photosynthesis, is through, through the sun hitting that plant and storing carbohydrates in its roots, sloughing off those carbohydrates. And that's how those little microbes are keeping alive. And in turn, those little microbes are bringing nutrients, water to that plant. So a root is a root. And the little microbes don't really care if it's a weed or if it's something that you intentionally planted there. So don't automatically, I'm not saying don't weed. If a plant is somewhere where you don't want it, go ahead and take it out. But the technique Kathleen and I do is we cut it at soil level. We leave those roots in the ground. Those roots are going to decompose. They're adding organic matter, and they're feeding the soil. The main thing you want is living soil. If you have living soil, you're going to retain the water that you put on in that soil. So further, here we go. There we go. Okay, cover cropping. So this is my yard. And so all cover cropping means Kathleen gave me a whole bunch of wildflower seeds. And I just broadcast them. I just threw them onto the ground, and up came all sorts of beautiful wildflowers. I have not yet still, and these were slides taken exactly 1 month ago. And sorry, my son's calling me. Sorry, just 1 second. Anyway, I broadcast them. I haven't given them any water. I still took photos today. I didn't have enough time to put them in the presentation today. The poppies they still have a few poppies. They're mostly gone. But the idea here is putting seeds in your garden. If you're going to irrigate, you can put them any time of year, but always have something growing. Don't have bare ground. I'm so sorry to do this. My son.
And Lisa and I both feel the same way about wildflower seeds. We let them go to flower and then actually go to seed, because then you don't have to buy them again. Those seed heads will then fall to the ground, and you'll have wildflowers growing everywhere whenever you want.
Yeah, you can see in the middle one, there's fava. Kathleen gave me a beautiful seed. It's a scarlet colored fava bean, and I just let that flower. I let all those seeds just drop to the ground, and now I never have to replant my fava beans. They just replant themselves. Last time we gave this talk, somebody said, well, then you're not putting as much nitrogen into your soil because you're letting your letting your fava beans go to seed and flower. That's true, but it's still pumping a ton of nitrogen into the ground. It's still putting on those nodules. Those nodules are still feeding that soil, and all those roots are feeding that soil, and that plant will die back. It'll reseed itself. And guess what? The lazy gardener doesn't have to do anything. It is all done on its own.
And those seeds germinate. If you have seeds that the wildflowers have, you let your wildflowers set the seeds and they drop to the ground. Those seeds are going to germinate when they're supposed to because they know when to germinate.
Yeah.
So it's like, let nature take care of itself and just throw those seeds out there once and you're good to go.
Yeah. And this is a vegetable class, and I do this in my vegetable garden too. So everything either has mulch on it or a living mulch, i.e. cover cropping. And you can go to Lyngso's website and you can just, if you go to their page of past classes, Kathleen has given an entire class on cover cropping. And if you have, I know it's like an hour or something, the class is, just watch your class, and it's well worth your time. It really is. So that's kind of our main point about keeping your soil evenly moist, is you've got to keep that soil covered with a cover crop or mulch. Benefits of cover cropping. Okay, well, I know we're beating this horse to death, but here we go. A cover crop is any plant used to protect the soil and feed the life in the soil. Cover crops improve the physical properties and structure of the soil, increase organic matter, protect your soil surface. So the main thing around water with this is and you can see this with your own eyes. If you are watering your garden, especially if you're watering your garden by hand instead of drip is better. We'll get into that. But let's say you don't have drip, so you have to water it by hand. You can just see if you're watering something by itself and there's not other plants around it, you're going to get runoff. You're not going to get good infiltration. If you're watering a tree, like all my fruit trees have cover crop all around them, and that water just soaks right in because it's following those roots down of all the plants watered around. So all that water is going right down into the whole root system of my trees. You can see it happen. I have a couple of trees where the cover crop hasn't taken, and I try to water those trees, and they're mulched, they're well mulched, and the water just runs off the surface. So I have to just drip. I have to sit there. Right now I don't have my drip irrigation set up for a different reason, so I have to hand water. And so I just have to sit there and put a tiny bit of water on, turn it off, tiny bit of water, turn it off. Or I water for a couple of minutes, let that go in, come back half an hour, water for a couple of minutes, come back half hour, water. So it takes me a long time to get the infiltration that I could just get by having a cover crop growing. So,
And
okay.
I will say, my whole backyard is cover cropped. Excuse me. And those big storms we had early winter last year, I had no puddling. All the water went down into the roots.
Yeah. And we'll get into that too, growing grasses next to your veggies. It's called grass-fed veggies. Okay, plant cooperation. We're kind of still on the same thing. So these are my fruit trees. These are the cover crops around my fruit trees. So the main point here I'd like to make is plants like each other. Plants cooperate with each other, and plants are good for each other. And I know I put up there, plants aren't like people. People get like competitive with each other. Plants aren't like that. Plants are polite and they cooperate. They like each other. And so they take care of each other. They even warn, and I know this is going to sound kind of like crystals and rainbowish to everybody, but read the book, Hidden Life of Trees and Overstory. But like when a giraffe comes and starts eating an acacia tree, then that tree puts out a pheromone that's warning the other trees, the giraffe's going to come start eating you. And they roll up their leaves so they can protect themselves. And so they talk, they're communicating. And this has all been proven. This is not like weird stuff. It's all been proven. by a woman scientist out of Canada who wrote the book. You read it, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Who wrote the book, Suzanne Simone. Anyway, that they all take care of each other. They're all interconnected. They all are kind of all scratch your back if you scratch my back. They love each other. So the more the better. The more plants you have, the better. Because, and it doesn't take, and I looked this up, I have the study, but I didn't put it in this slide presentation. So UC Davis did a very extensive research program. More plants do not use more water. So that's the main point from like 2 slides ago. So you think, oh, I have 10 plants here, so I have to put on 10 times the water. That's not true. If you're cover cropping, you're using the exact same amount of water, not more, not less, the exact same amount of water for that tree. So like the second slide in, or any of those slides, you're using the same amount of water you would put on that tree. You're not putting any more on the water because you have more plants there. You're just getting better water infiltration and you're keeping your soil moist by having more plants around that tree. So you're not using more water. And you'll see in the second slide, I have a zucchini planted there, and that last slide, you'll see I have my onions and I have my strawberries. So I'm trying to grow more food using less water, and the way I'm doing it is I'm using vegetables as my cover crop. So I'm using strawberries, onions, zucchini, I'm using pumpkins, I'm using all my winter squashes. They're all planted around my trees. I'm using the exact same amount of water, but bonus, I get a whole bunch of vegetables from it. So that's just a way to use your water more efficiently. And also the great news is if you grow a pumpkin patch or butternut squash or delicata or any of your vining summer squashes, winter squashes, then those vines are going to go and cover all of that soil around there, and they're going to keep that soil cooler, and you're going to get less evaporation. So it's like a win-win-win. You're growing, you're going to water that tree anyway. You're also watering your winter squash. So you're getting double right there. And your other win is that is going to cover all the soil, and it's going to keep that soil cooler, and it's going to hold that moisture into that soil. So it's a win-win-win. Oh, and it's a quadruple win because also those vining things, your squirrels and all your rats and stuff, they don't like to get in there. There's little prickly things on all those vines, and the little creatures don't like to get in there. So you get more peaches off your peach tree. And so quadruple win on that. Okay. Oh, Kathleen, you want to talk? This is your slide.
Well, this is just the benefits of having plants growing in your soil versus bare root. And you'll have much better water infiltration, healthier soil. You won't need to water as much. If there is any dew or moisture, it will be captured by the plants. So it's just one more reason to plant more plants. It's not going to use more water. It actually conserves water.
Yeah. And I would say there's a movie on Netflix, Kiss the Ground.
Yeah.
With Woody Harrelson. He's the narrator. So if you have Netflix, it's free. But you can also just go to kisstheground.com. And I think you can, if you don't have Netflix, they will still let you watch it for free. And there's a researcher on there, and he went to Africa and he planted out a whole bunch of plants. It's amazing to me. He developed a whole ecosystem. Like if we could all do this, if we could like get the word out to the entire world to plant more plants on our entire planet, if we could just cover it with plants, not the ocean part, but then we could we could reverse climate change and all these huge hurricanes and tornadoes. I know I'm sounding like a crazy person, but I'm not. But we really we could shift climate change because we're putting so much carbon into the soil and we're storing all that carbon where it should be stored, which is in the soil. And we're developing a different water cycle. So we would start getting some water again in California, which would be really, really nice. If we could just cover the world with plants, we would stop a lot of these crazy extreme weather events. So spread the word.
Yeah, and throw out some flower seeds and cover
Yeah.
crop.
Yeah, cover crop. You can do it now. You would have to irrigate, but so you can do it any time of year. Great time to do it is before the rains come, and in spring. Well, all through, let's say, October through May, throwing seeds out. If you do throw them out now, you're going to have to put a little bit of irrigation on them. But okay,
Yeah, but not for long.
yeah, true.
Especially if you throw out California native seeds, once they get up just a little bit, there's this saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is 10 years ago. And when's the second best time to plant a tree? And it's today.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same idea is, even if you have to water your cover crop or your wildflower seeds, whatever you want to call it, for a few weeks, it's better to do it today than to not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now we'll go on to mulch. So mulch.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say. Yeah, the more the better. So you can mulch with living plants like we just talked about, or you can mulch with straw, hay, alfalfa pellets, wood chips, any organic matter, or as we talked about, plants or cover crops. You will reduce your water usage by 50% if you mulch. So my whole yard is mulched. I probably put 4 to 6 inches of wood chips. I got them free. You can just call up an arborist. They'll come dump them for free. They're happy to do it. So I got all of it for free, and put a good layer of mulch. I also personally think the fastest way to grow soil is mulch, because I put about, like I said, 4 to 6 inches. Right now it looks more like 2 inches because a whole bunch of that mulch turned into beautiful soil.
Yeah.
I mean, like beautiful soil, like you could put your hand down in it. It's gorgeous. So, and it's retaining the moisture, and that's what you want to do, because that's what's keeping those little microbes alive. Okay. Oops. Planting time. We touched on this, but I took a class a while ago. This is a long time ago. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago on how to use less water when you're doing vegetable gardening. And the entire class, it was kind of funny to me, but the entire class was grow winter crops. And so, but it's true, because I don't water my garden at all now talking about my vegetable garden. I don't put any water from October, November through till April or May. I just let the rain do it. Now, granted, we've had this past year when we had no rain in January and February. And into March, we didn't have rain. We didn't really get rain till April. I did have to supplement a little bit of rain. A little bit of water there. But all the crops that you see listed there, those are all your fall, winter, spring crops. And like Kathleen said, you can't dry farm them, but those are all the crops you're growing during the rainy season. Make sure you turn your irrigation off. Starting in fall through spring, make sure you're not watering anything during that period of time, unless we get that weird dry spell for 3 months where we don't get a drop of rain. And then you probably do have to do a little bit of supplemental watering. But kind of my point with all this is 2/3 of, well, actually all vegetables you grow in winter time. What we're growing now is summertime is fruit, technically, or tomatoes and cucumbers and stuff is fruit. So all vegetative vegetables grow in winter without any added water by you.
And most people irrigate too much.
Yeah.
Even my clients where, they're not willing to take an ugly plant. So for right now, I'm watering twice a week for 30 minutes. They're on drip. And that's less than I have in the past, and the plants look fine.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing how little water plants really need, especially if they're mulched well and you've got a lot of compost in your soil. Irrigation. So I researched this, and so what the research says for our area, May through September, we need to put on about 1 inch per week for vegetables. But I think you could do that in about half. I think you could do, instead of 20 inches during your whole growing season, your summer growing season, I think you could do 10 inches. But like Kathleen has said a couple of times now, your plants aren't going to look like the cover of Sunset magazine or something. They're going to look a little dry. They're going to look a little, especially when you get towards August, September. So it also depends on your tolerance of how ugly you can stand your garden looking. So I have a pretty high tolerance, but not everybody does. Drip versus overhead. So drip is another way you can save a lot of water. You can save about 50% by using a drip system. I put in a link there. Right now they have a sale on the UC-ANR, the Agricultural Natural Resources publications of how to do it yourself for irrigation. And you do save water by using drip versus certainly by using like an oscillating sprinkler or by overhead watering or even by hand watering. So that's just a way to save. And one of the reasons is it really is a drip. It's just like drip, drip, drip. So the water's going in really slowly. You're getting better infiltration. You're getting that, do this yourself at home. Try this at home. When you hand water, you think you're sitting there forever on a plant, and you count to 60, and then you come back to that plant and count to 60 again, come back to that plant, count to 60 again. And you think, man, that water must have gotten down like 6 or 7 inches. I really put a lot of water on that plant. And then you get out your hand trowel and you're like, oh, it got in like 1/4 of an inch. It's amazing to me. And I think that's why drip does save so much water, because it's such a minute amount of water over a longer period of time. So, and also it's right on the soil, so you're not getting any evaporation. I've read over and over water in the morning, which is true because it reduces evaporation. I would say have your irrigation system going off when you're going to be in your garden, because I have another new theory that I just came up with. Is when you're out in your garden and your irrigation's running, you can see leaks that you're not going to see. I know so many people who have it go off at 3 a.m. or 4 or 5 a.m. They could have a huge leak, a huge geyser that they don't even know about. So I would prefer having it go off if you're in your garden at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever time you're in your garden. That's when your irrigation should go off, so you can watch for leaks. And I had to go up to Fairfield this weekend, and the irrigation's going off at nighttime, and they're watering their cement. It's just all falling on their cement. It's like a geyser. And that's me seeing one thing because I happen to be there. I honestly think, this is my new theory, if we were to fix every single leak in every single irrigation system in the United States, I mean, we would not have a drought. We would not have a shortage of water like we do. It's just there's so many leaks in people's irrigation systems that they don't know about, and we're just wasting. It's just going down the storm drain. I can just watch it. And you can tell management and they can say, oh yeah, what a bummer. And I just feel strongly about keeping your eyes on your irrigation system to make sure you aren't watering something that you like cement, like you don't intend to be watering. So that's
And
my soapbox.
more often than not, when you're out and you have your irrigation going, it's not that you're going to see something, you're going to hear it.
Yeah, true. Good point.
So when you're out, I play music when I'm gardening, but when I start and I turn on my irrigation, I don't have any music and I just listen, and you can hear if there's a problem. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, no, good point. Other little tricks is just you can grow your vegetables more in a trench. So the water infiltrates down a lot. So much of this is just infiltration. Fluctuate your watering. So like last Sunday, we got rain here.
Yeah.
Well, there's two theories on this, Kathleen. So that might not be a bad day to go ahead and water, because that plant, it's cool out.
Yeah.
You're not going to lose a lot to evaporation. That might actually be, you have overcast, a good day to go ahead and water, especially when you looked at the forecast and you knew it was going to get hot. That might be a nice day to go ahead. We got, I think, 1/4 of an inch or something, but that might be a good day to put an inch on to get those plants ready for the hot days that are coming forward. When you water on a super, super hot day, you're just going to get a lot more evaporation.
Yeah, although I put mulch on top of my irrigation lines so that it doesn't evaporate.
Yeah.
So that's another way to help the water get to where you want it. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I went to one of my clients' gardens the day after it rained, and I dug around and you wouldn't have known it rained.
Yeah.
So it wasn't enough rain. But if the drip would have been running that day, it would have been great.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. And also, I mean, this is micromanaging your plant, but when it's a seedling, it needs more water. When it's in its growing stage, it needs less water. When it's setting fruit, it needs more. And after it's set fruit, it needs less. I mean, that's really fine tuning it. And I don't know if people are going to sit there and like fine tune it that much, but that same plant doesn't need the same water throughout its entire life cycle. It waxes and wanes. So modified dry farming. So this is just to add on what Kathleen was talking about at the beginning, the dry farming. What I do is I cut all my water to my tomatoes. So I do water them during the growing season and while they're setting fruit. And then in September, I cut water to my tomatoes and they look awful. I mean, I'm going to be honest, after they haven't had any water for a few weeks, they don't look so great. But their fruit is delicious and they still set fruit, and we're getting shorter days by September. We're getting a lot less sunlight, less hot days, and the tomatoes are really delicious. So, and you can, like I said in the earlier slide, cut your water by half for your crops this year and see what happens. I mean, so much of gardening is just observation and being curious and wondering what's going to happen. So hydrozone. So also put thirsty plants together and not thirsty plants together. So Kathleen went through some drought tolerant plants. Put all those guys together. If you have some super thirsty plants, put all those together so you don't overwater your drought tolerant plants. Water less often, water deeper. My trees, I was just telling Kathleen before we started today, my fruit trees, I've only watered them twice this whole year, once in May and once today. So I just try to do a super, super deep soak. My trees are 4 years old. It probably won't be only to do it once a month, but I hope to do it only once every 2 weeks or so. So just water deeper, less often. Okay. Extra water tips. So this isn't that long ago that I took these photos. So these are, I just put whenever we do have a rain, I put my garbage cans underneath my water spouts and I catch rain. And I do that throughout the entire winter, and I did it this spring. I don't count on that water for summer watering because it's 50 gallons at a time. But when we do have those dry spells in winter, which seem to be more and more often, then I use that water. So I don't have to use hose water. I don't have to use city water during the winter. And the San Mateo County, we're doing a huge discount on these huge water barrels. So hook those up to my downspout. So between garbage cans and the water barrels, I try to catch a lot of winter water, and I release it in winter. And then in April, when we had all that water, I caught so much water, and I just finished using the last of it last month. So I really haven't had to use any city water. I just am starting to use my city water now.
I'm putting in 1,000-gallon tank tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's so fun. So, by hook or by crook, like these, I mean, it's plastic, so you kind of hate that, but these garbage cans don't cost that much money. And it's a nice way to save some water. Other little things, I mean, I really I'm weird because I was raised by two people who were born in the Depression, and they were born right before the Dust Bowl, and we just did not waste. Just not allowed in our family. So, when I'm washing my hands, I go outside and I wash them over a plant. If I boil my veggies in some water, I let that water cool down and then I go water a plant. If I'm watering a potted plant for, let's say, an indoor plant, I go outside and I water it over another plant. So when it goes out the bottom, it's watering another plant. And that's called pot water. In the olden days, everybody watered their plants with pot water. When I'm doing my dishes, I catch it in a basin, a little bit soapy. It's okay. It's not, I don't put it on an edible. I put it on, I put it on an ornamental, and I really try hard not to let any water go down the drain. I have buckets in my, if I'm letting my water get hot, I have a bucket, I catch that water and I put it. My house does have, it has 5 maple trees that were here before I came here. Those aren't, maple trees are California natives, but these guys are thirsty. So all that extra water, I put it on my maple trees. And so just be, there's classes on laundry to landscape. I don't put that stuff on my edibles, but I do put it on my maple trees. And don't let the water run while you're doing dishes or brushing your teeth, unless you're catching that water. But I honestly, every single drop of water to me is precious, and I don't want to waste it. And I bet everybody in this group watching this has 5 ways that they save water that is meaningful. And we need to publish a little book of all the ways that people save water. So that's my little, there's my brothers. That's Kathleen and I, our brother Kent, that's his garden. And that's my garden. I garden here in Portola Valley, but I also have a little farm in Woodside. Garden size and setup. So my brother's in raised beds, I'm in the ground. When I was doing research for this class, they said raised beds more efficient for water because you're containing your water. I'm going to say, okay, that's what the research said. I
don't think there's enough research done on that yet, personally.
Yeah. And I have to say, I mean, in the ground.
Yeah, especially our clay soil in this area. It has such a great water holding capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and those roots, they go find water. Like Kathleen had that slide, they go down and they find water. So personally for me, I like to garden in the ground, but a lot of people garden in raised beds. I'm going to just say to each their own on this. I garden, you can see my irrigation is called T-tape. It just kind of oozes out. And I think, then garden size is the other thing besides setup. And so, you know, if you're a family of 2, you're going to grow less food than if you're a family of 8 or something like that. So I used to sell my produce, so that's why I have a really big garden. Now we give it away to food banks. But so I'm growing a lot of vegetables, more than my family can eat, but it's going to good use. But don't grow 10 tomato plants if you're only going to eat a little bit. You know, you're only going to eat from 1 tomato plant, unless you're giving it away, you know, if you're giving it to your neighbors and you have an exchange. But I just hate to see things go to waste. So I guess that's my point there, is just grow what you're going to eat or what you have set up to share with people or give to a food bank. So any words on that, Kathleen?
No, grow what you want, grow what you like.
Yeah, grow what you like. Also, if you hate chard, don't grow chard. If you know. So anyway, I know that seems obvious, but
Yeah, I'm not growing any eggplant in my house because
you don't like eggplant.
no, we don't need eggplant.
Yeah, I like eggplant. So this is just principles. This is by a guy named Gabe Brown, he's a farmer in North Dakota. That's where Kathleen and I are from. And his principles are good for feeding the soil, and his principles are good for watering the soil. So it's just disturb the soil as little as possible. Don't till your soil. Don't turn your soil. Your soil knows where it wants to be. It's all stratified with all its little microbes. So don't turn their little houses upside down. Grow green living plants. Always have roots in the ground. Always have roots in the ground. I guess we could tell about, I think it was it Chris Nichols? I think it was.
Yeah.
Who she's a farmer from the Midwest. She's
No, she's a scientist.
She's a scientist. She's a PhD, but she advises. She's a farm advisor. And she came out to California. Believe me, this is the land of milk and honey compared to the Midwest. You know, we don't have to deal with a lot of stuff that they have to deal with. And she was driving to a class we were taking in the Central Valley, and she was going by field after field that wasn't planted out. And she just kept saying, dumb shit, dumb shit, dumb shit. She shared that with our class, that have roots in the ground 24/7, 365. Just always roots in the ground. Do not have bare soil. Just don't do that. Okay, that point is made. Grow a diversity of plants. The better the diversity, the better your soil is. Cover your soil with either mulch or plants. Incorporate animals if possible. Not everybody can, but if you can have chickens and you compost that chicken manure, add that back to your soil. We didn't talk a lot about composting and adding organic matter. We'll do
But
that.
if you cover crop, you're doing that.
Yeah, if you're cover cropping, you're adding organic matter. But 3 times a year, I'm adding compost to my soil, to my vegetable beds. Google Wendy Silver. She's in the Cal Marin Carbon Project. Read Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. Great book. Watch Kiss the Ground. We mentioned that, or A Living Soil, or Symphony of Soil. Listen to Dr. Chris Nichols, Dr. Christine Jones, and Christine Olson. So many of the scientists on this are women. Go see Singing Frog Farm up in Sebastopol. They're a no-till farm. There's more and more no-till farms. People are catching on. Recap. This is our last slide before questions and answers. When you guys have been patient, this has taken an hour. So recap ideas. Plant around your existing vegetation. So you're getting that win-win-win of fruits, vegetables for the same amount of water. Plant your vegetables really densely. Plant in a diamond pattern. Don't plant in rows. If you are going to plant in rows and the rows are this far, plant in a diamond pattern. So you're covering as much soil as possible. Check irrigation regularly for leaks. I made my point about that. Drip over sprinkler. Water less, observe more. I kind of like that. I made that up myself.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Increase water infiltration, decrease water evaporation, add compost 3 times a year between your cropping.
What compost? What kind of compost, Lisa?
Well, I make my own, but Lyngso, we do not work for Lyngso. We have no affiliation with Lyngso. Lyngso has one called Distill Structured Compost, which is gold.
It is.
And you can add, it's expensive. You don't have to add a lot, but add half an inch 3 times a year. And then put some.
Once you put the compost, make sure you put the mulch on top of it that day, because the sun will beat it down. So you want to cover that beautiful, expensive compost immediately with mulch.
Amen. And they think they sell something there that you can use as a mulch.
Well, I use their is it soil amendment?
Yeah,
That's kind of mulchy.
yeah, amendment mix you're talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that as a mulch.
Yeah, so you could use that as a mulch, but whatever you do, whether it's straw or alfalfa or
Chips,
although chips get a little tricky in a vegetable garden, but you can,
little chips.
yeah, little tiny chips would be fine. And of course, cover crop. Then you're going to get less runoff. The water goes down. The water's going to follow the roots down. And also you will not have compact soil. Once your soil's compacted, you cannot get water down to the root zone. So don't step on your soil if you can help it. Grow winter crops. So plant in fall and spring. Let the rain do the work for you. Capture rain in rain barrels and garbage cans. More water wise to grow your own. Yeah, Kathleen mentioned growing your own versus going to a farmer's market. You're gonna use less water because you're not transporting that. There's lots of reasons why you're losing. You're also observing a lot more.
Yeah.
Dry farm or modified dry farm and hydrozone. Use put thirsty things and not thirsty things together. And now I think we're ready for questions and answers. Hopefully answers.
all right. So let's go back to the beginning and I'll read them off.
Yikes.
Okay, so we have folks from everywhere, right? So not just California, but I'm assuming, especially in Texas, there's different challenges. Whereas if you're from North Carolina or, various challenges there. But regardless, let's start with, there were a lot of cover crop questions. So that I did put a link in there for the talk that you both did. But let's just answer one of them. Do you cover crop with tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers? I'm guessing if you have tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers, do you cover crop?
Yeah, I cover crop everything.
Yeah, I do too.
So
I grew when I have stuff like that, I get low growing stuff like lobelia. I started staying away from sweet alyssum because it's pretty invasive. Violas, Johnny jump ups, which another benefit to cover cropping with a low growing flowering plant. And there's some California natives as well that you could use that are low growing, is the bees are going to come and they're going to help pollinate your summer vegetables because they're drawn in by the flowers of the other things you have in there. But like lobelia, I mean, it's beautiful. It stays low. It doesn't block the sun from the tomatoes. It's a win-win, I think.
Yeah, and I cover cropped with radishes this year for my tomatoes. And even low growing sunflowers are really pretty. And some people cover crop with another edible crop like basil, for instance. And then you just bring your mozzarella balls out and you have a party.
Yeah, or if you're on the coast, you can do lettuce or spinach, or if you're in a cooler climate, you can cover crop. Arugula works great. But I plant densely.
Yeah. And the three sisters, we should probably mention. A lot of people will grow corn, beans, and summer squash together. And the corn provides the pole for the pole bean, and the summer squash keeps the soil cool with its great big huge leaves. So that's kind of a win-win. And that's cover cropping system. And then they're all working together and you're getting a crop out of all three of them.
Yeah, and you can do winter squash as well as summer squash with Three Sisters.
Yeah. And also the three sisters are the Lyngso sisters.
Yeah.
That's the other three sisters.
Okay, so there are a whole bunch of questions about cover crops, but I'm gonna let folks click on that link and watch that cover crop video to learn a little bit more about it, because a lot of these are addressed there. Okay, so the next question is, you both addressed it quite a bit. What type of mulch is fir okay? Maybe you can just kind of summarize that.
Yeah, anything is good to mulch.
Mulch is mulch. I mean,
In fact, I have a giant eucalyptus in my front yard that I bought a chipper for so I could chip up the bark and the branches and the leaves. And eucalyptus mulch is just fine. It actually makes a lovely mulch.
Yeah.
So you can mulch with anything. Maybe not black walnut. Black walnut is allelopathic, meaning it actually has chemicals that suppress other plants. But I think black walnut is the only plant I know of that that's the case.
Yeah, and a little bit depends on your aesthetic. In my veggie garden, I mulched this year with alfalfa hay. And I should mention earlier, you might have seen I put straw and hay for mulch. And a lot of people say, oh no, hay is for horses. You can only mulch with straw. But Kathleen and I are lazy gardeners. And you know, the benefit to us is if you mulch with hay, which has a seed head, and straw doesn't have a seed head. If you mulch with something that has a seed head, then guess what? That's going to also germinate and it's going to grow a cover crop for you. And grasses are a really nice cover crop.
Yeah, very fibrous roots. They're wonderful.
Yeah. So we feel like it's a 2-for-1 if you mulch with hay, but you're not going to hear that from very many people. All right.
Okay. Alrighty, so this is a great question. Do you also use compost tea? If so, how often? Is once a week okay?
Wow. I don't use compost tea. Kathleen, do you?
I do not, because I'm not organized enough to go buy Lyngso's compost tea the day it's ready and go apply it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. We should say to the person, I think it's great. Once a week seems a little much to me.
It's quite a lot. I think once a week compost tea is a bit much. And we haven't brewed in a couple of years, by the way, due to COVID and all that. But there are little tea bags that you can get. It's technically compost tea, but what you're making is an extract rather than a tea, because it's not actively being aerated.
Oh, okay.
But I think once a week is way too much. It's an overkill.
Yeah, I think you're just, it seems to me maybe wasting resources at that point.
Yeah, but you're probably not damaging the plant by doing that.
No, I think it's just unnecessary to do it once. Maybe like once a season would be good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add there is pay attention to, like if you are doing something like that, if you're getting a ton of vegetative, let's take a tomato, you're getting a ton of vegetative growth and you're not having a whole lot of fruit set, you're over nutrienting that plant.
Yeah, that's too much nitrogen.
You can back way off and let that plant fend for itself a little bit more and get those relationships going with the other plants around it that are going to be taking care of each other. So.
Alrighty, so the next question is regarding weeds. I know you talked about weeding, and some people don't weed, others do. Some cut it to the soil level, maybe leave the roots in there. The question is, what if it's a weed that can propagate through its weeds, I guess? I think they mean seeds.
Well, you're going to cut off the top before your weed set seed. You can still leave the roots in the ground, but cut off the top. And if you stay on it, you won't let that weed set seed.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the farm in Woodside, we just, I'm going to say weeded in quotes, 2 rows. And yeah, all we did is we went through, I wanted to leave my radishes. I had maybe 7 different things in there for cover cropping, but then also a lot of purslane, a lot of mallow, and a couple other weeds. And we just cut those off at soil level, and they'll resprout, which is good because that's pumping more carbon down into the soil. So I actually like it when they resprout.
And a really easy way to do it is if you guys know what a hula hoe is, just there's even little handheld hula hoes. It's just like this rectangle, open rectangle with a blade, and you just scrape that on top of your soil back and forth, and it just cuts the weed heads off, and you can just leave them there to mulch.
Yeah. So you can use a weed as a cover crop, I guess, is the bottom line. Weeds are only bad if they really bug you.
Yeah, but you don't want them to go to seed. Like if you have a dandelion,
Yeah.
you don't want, or popweed, you don't want the seeds popping all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally, well, I have clients who I have to be a little bit more careful because there's an aesthetic I have to achieve for them. So I don't let the weeds go to seed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good practice.
Yeah.
Okay, alrighty. A lot more questions about cover cropping. I don't think we need to address it. Let's see. Where did, oh yeah, okay. You had mentioned more plants don't mean more water. The article, do we have a reference to that in this?
You know what, I'm going to have to send that to you. It was research done by UC Davis.
Okay.
I just put up our references, dry farming. I'm just going to give a little shout out to a video where I have grass-fed vegetables. And this isn't like UC approved or anything like that. But that video, it's a guy, I think he's in Maine. And he hasn't put water on any of his crops for 7 years, but he grows them in grass. And grass roots can go down like 7-8 feet. And those roots for his veggies just follow those grass roots down, and they get the water where they can. And it's actually pretty fascinating. And I kind of like grass-fed vegetables. I think it's kind of cute. But the plants don't use more or less water is from a research project done at UC Davis. So I'm going to have to get that link to you.
Okay, great. You could also add it into this reference slide here as well.
Okay.
And then that way we can share it with all the resources there.
I should say that first link is the US, or second link, I guess, the USDA. They actually found with cover cropping in a drought, they got just as good yield without watering as they did with watering. So that's something to look into also, but I'll get that. I'll get that reference for you.
Okay, awesome. Let's move on to irrigation. Do you know any leak adjustment programs? Do some water districts offer it?
Oh, that's a good question.
It is a good question.
You know, I know my husband just bought a
you can buy it works with the smart waterers. Like the Hunter now has a smart water controller, and it will alert you if that zone is using more water than it is supposed to.
Yeah, and I can't think of the name of it. We have a thing that we just bought that goes on our water meter. Yeah, it's super, super sensitive. So even when you think
water
you're not,
gauge.
I guess I can't remember the name of it. You know what? I'll look that up too.
Or go to Urban Farmers website. it's Urban Farmer in San Francisco. If you just Google that, they have some really good information on their website.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think you have to get a smart controller, which are those, you know, they're Wi-Fi, they hook into, they're really totally worth it. If you want to invest, they're like $250 into a new controller for your irrigation system. They adjust seasonally and they're excellent. They turn off the water in the winter. They then slowly increase it and they tie into weather stations. So if a storm's coming, they stop irrigating. It's really a good thing to get as a smart irrigation controller.
Yeah.
All right. On your irrigation point, folks are wondering if you could go over the second point on that page, monitor soil moisture with your finger or something.
Oh, yeah.
They're
I
wondering,
was gonna put a different finger up, but you guys are lucky I didn't do that.
they're wondering if you ever use trust a moisture meter.
Well, can I answer this one, Lisa? Okay, so I worked at a nursery for 10 years on and off, and we had a water meter that we sold, and it was like $12. So I took it and I put it into a lemon and it registered dry. So that's what, I mean, if you're gonna buy a really good soil moisture, they're at least a couple $100. And honestly, I use my soil knife or my finger.
Yeah.
And you know, you put your finger down, you
shake it.
dig around a little bit, and you can tell if your water's dry or not.
Yeah, I should, I know when Kathleen says a soil knife, so this is my gardening basket. And this is just, I think it's called a hurry, but you can just put it in, it's 6 inches long, go and see where the water's going and see, you should do this periodically throughout the year and just, especially after you water, just see, is the water getting to where you want it to go? Is it getting down to the root zone? The other thing I should say, 80% of the roots for a tree are in the top 12 inches. 90% of the roots for a tree are in the top 24 inches. So this like taproot thing that you always hear about, and I think that's all trees. Kathleen's an arborist, so you could certified arborist.
No, that's all trees. And the at the trunk of the tree, if the tree is more than a couple years old, the roots are out like way further than you think. And those are the feeding roots that are way out from the tree. And those are where the water needs to be, not at the trunk of the tree.
Yeah, so water out. In the slide that had my trees, well, I had some young trees there, but you wanna, well, that's a baby tree, so it's still right around, I just put that tree in. My other trees are about 4 years old, but, and even that's too close. Kathleen, I think admonished
Yeah,
me.
that's too close.
Yeah, so they need to be out past the drip line.
And the drip line is where the canopy stops. That's like, if you imagined it's raining and the rain doesn't fall right under the tree, right? Because there's leaves. So the drip line is out where the canopy stops. That's where you want to start watering and go out from there, because that's where the roots are.
Yeah. And the nice thing about that, if you're watering one tree, you're actually watering a different tree because the feeder roots have come over there.
Yeah, they all talk to each other and, you know, interchange.
They're all big mishmash.
Yeah.
Okay, so follow up on that. So when you say water deeper or like a super deep soak, less often for trees, how long do you water them? And how do you know it's deep enough?
Well, how you know it's deep enough is what we were just talking about, is you do have to dig to see, or pull the soil back a little bit. And I guess my point with that is, you know, some people water and they think they've gotten really deep and they've gotten a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. But why I was saying like 80% of the roots are in the top 12 inches it's not like you need to go down 8 feet with water, but you do for a tree, let's say, you want to probably get that top 12 inches wet. So when you go with your soil knife, you want to see that it's wet or moist, not wet, 6 to 12 inches down. With a vegetable, I mean, well, tomato roots go down about 8 feet, but I'm not going to go digging 8 feet to see if, but you just want to see that the top few inches are moist.
Yeah.
And when we say water more, less often, like where I just planted the lettuce and I was watering 10 minutes every day,
Yeah.
don't do that. That's terrible for any good living soil. To get that much water is bad. You
Yeah.
want to water maybe twice a week for a half hour. If it's a mature tree, probably once a month for an hour if you have a drip system,
Yeah.
is plenty of water.
Yeah. And so Kathleen, when she was saying twice a week for a half hour, that's a vegetable bed.
Yeah.
And that would be probably perfectly adequate. And again, just check and see if it's getting down. For a vegetable bed, I want to make sure it's getting down probably at least 6 inches.
Yeah. I took classes at City College, and one of my instructors, somebody was asking him, like, when do you fertilize? When do you water? And he said, look at the plant. The plant will tell you what it needs.
Yeah.
If your plants are yellow and shriveled up and they look like they're dying and you're watering them all the time, then there's a problem. But, let the plant tell you what it needs.
Yeah. And one other little funny, I mean, you can see a plant and it's totally wilted.
Yeah.
That plant might need water, but you also might want to tug on that plant because it might be that a gopher just ate all the roots of that plant. And that plant's wilted because it doesn't have any roots anymore.
Or it might be totally overwatered and it's oxygen deprived and it looks the exact same as underwater.
Yeah, that's the problem. Underwater and overwater look the same.
So that's why we say use your finger, because it's not, the water meters are bad if you buy a good expensive one, but you're also in the ground, you're looking and you're observing and you're using your own senses and you're touching your soil, and you'll have a much better idea of what's going on if you actually dig into your own soil and look around.
Alrighty. Do you use gray water outside the catchment of your sink water?
Not on edibles.
Yeah, I would on an ornamental, but I wouldn't on an edible.
Alrighty. And then there's also a gray water. Oh, okay. Gray water talk on the website too. That's my dog over here. All right. Raised bed. Could you talk a bit about the benefits of growing on a raised bed versus in ground, or if there are any, and if there aren't, that's fine.
Do you want to take that one, Kathleen, or you want me to?
Well, no, raised beds, if you have a really big gopher problem, you can put hardware cloth at the bottom of your raised bed. Make sure you do a good soil interface when you do that, meaning don't have the soil under it be concrete, just pack solid. You want it kind of roughed up. You're going to put some of the soil you're putting into the raised bed into that soil and mix it up, and then put the raised bed there. Other than having a big gopher problem, I don't know. Well, you can cage things.
It's easier to control
on a raised bed, in a raised bed, but if you don't have a rodent or gopher problem, I grow on the ground.
Yeah, I like the ground better myself, but it is easier to control in a raised bed.
Yeah, I go back to like the 1910 references that I found, and nobody had raised beds then. Yeah. The ground is full of nutrients that we don't even understand or know about. So go for the ground if you can. If you can't, raised beds are fine.
Okay. And then how deep should a person prepare their soil for a vegetable garden in general?
I just planted my tomatoes recently and I had a cover crop. So I mowed down my cover crop and then I mulched and then I got my big shovel out and I planted my tomatoes probably about 8 inches down, but I only dug where my tomatoes were going. So that's the only disturbance I did, is the actual planting of the tomato. The rest of it I left.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on if the ground is planted out currently or not planted out, or if it's been blown, so it's like cement. Because you might have to grow a cover crop for a year and mulch and add compost and then plant your garden.
Yeah, we have our brother Kent, just a little aside, he's just doing some new landscaping and he hired a landscaper who's gonna rototill and then add compost and rototill again. And Lisa and I were both horrified that that's how he plans on preparing the soil, because what he's doing when he's rototilling, however far down he goes, he's creating a hard pan. So essentially, he's ruined the drainage that is there. What we recommend is cover crop for a year, mow it down, mulch, and then plant.
Okay, already. There's so many questions I've got to pick and choose here. Let's talk about fertilizers. What do you use to fertilize tomatoes? Organic recommendations.
I have a client who was complaining to me, it was like 3 weeks ago, that her tomatoes weren't growing fast enough. So to satisfy her, I fertilized with some fish emulsion.
Yeah, if I was going to fertilize at all, it would be fish emulsion, but I put compost on my soil 3 times a year, so I don't fertilize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just use the compost as fertilizer.
We do have citrus in pots on this site, and I do use down to earth citrus fertilizer, and I think down to earth probably makes a pretty good vegetable fertilizer as well. That
Yes,
I
they
wouldn't.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm actually wearing my Down to Earth t-shirt. You probably can't see it, but
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to using either of those. And if you have citrus in a pot, you don't have the whole soil food web going on in that pot, so you do need to fertilize it.
Yeah, in a pot, but yeah, in a raised bed or in the ground, if you're adding compost, you probably, and cover cropping, and mulching, you probably don't need to fertilize.
Yeah.
And if, I will throw it out there, I'll give a little plug for Down to Earth. My favorite fertilizer to use for all veggies and fruit trees is the BioLive. It's sort of a comprehensive fertilizer, and they do add the mycorrhizal fungi and the beneficial bacteria to that. So it's a really, really good all-purpose fertilizer for pretty much anything in your garden, I think. So, and they're all really low numbers too. So it's not gonna be like a chemical fertilizer.
Yeah, you don't want anything over like 333
or 222.
Yeah. I mean, if you get Miracle Grow, it's like 15, 15, 15, which is nitrogen, potassium, phosphate. Is that the right
Or
numbers?
phosphorus or something. Yeah.
Anyway,
We don't.
Nitrogen's the first one, and you want that to be fairly low, like 3 or less.
But since you asked, just don't use chemical fertilizers kind of anywhere. I mean, if you are going to fertilize, make sure you use an organic fertilizer.
Yeah, Down to Earth is a wonderful product.
Yeah.
So regarding the fertilizer, I just shared a link in the chat there. So it's BioLive. Take a look at that. But the one thing I will say is if you're growing fruits like tomatoes, it is a higher nitrogen fertilizer. So you do want to cut down on nitrogen and add phosphorus and potassium during growing stages. So Fishbone meal is wonderful for fruit production, by the way. So
Okay.
I would stick with that. Okay. I think there was one good question that I skipped over. Bindweeds. Can you talk about bindweeds for a bit? Because they propagate through the roots as well as through their flowers. So
Yeah. Field bindweed, you do not want to pull. If you pull it, the roots shatter and every little tiny piece of root, which is, you know, teeny tiny, becomes a new plant. And then you get a whole mat of field bindweed. If you cut it off at soil level again and again and again and again and again, or if you're able to sheet mulch, and Lyngso's has a great link to sheet mulching. But yeah, field bindweed, I have a client with field bindweed and their gardeners pull it and I cut it off. So we have a little thing going. You can also spray it with 30% vinegar, but you're going to have to do it again and again and again because it's a perennial and it has an extensive root system, but don't pull it out, cut it off.
Yeah. It's our nemesis.
Yeah. That and that sticky, what's that sticky weed?
It's an ugly weed. I know the one you're talking about.
Tick, or I don't know what it's called, but I hate that weed.
Yeah. And I will say, I should mention this, but you'll get it in the cover crop class. One year I cover cropped and vetch was in the cover crop mix.
Yeah.
And now my entire property is covered with vetch and it's hard to control. So when you do cover crop, a lot of times they'll put vetch in it. Don't use vetch. It's too invasive.
Yeah, I agree. I still have vetch from 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard.
Every time I see it, I pull it. Well,
Yeah.
I don't pull it. I cut it off. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. And even if you do, other than field bindweed, if you pull your weeds, you are gonna get some of the root, but a lot of the roots are left behind. So there's no hard and fast rules in gardening as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Everything is observation and curiosity and seeing what happens when you cut your water in half and seeing what happens if you don't weed, seeing what happens when you do weed. It's just get really curious and really observe what's going on. And you're going to learn way more from that than
From us.
That's for dang sure.
Well, I will say with oxalis, I pull it because I want to get the bulblet.
Yeah.
And the oxalis that I planted grasses around, I pull up some of the grasses and the oxalis.
Yeah.
And then I get the bulblet.
Yeah.
And then I get to do my bulblet dance.
Amen.
I love my bulblet dance.
And that reminds me of something when I'm seeding or I'm planting a plant, I like to plant it right next to a weed because I know that that's a live soil and I know that the water and the nutrients are there. I mean, if a weed can grow there, then my plant can grow there versus planting it where nothing's growing. So, I mean, weeds are kind of a good sign somewhat, not always, but weeds are kind of a good sign that you have healthy soil. You'd rather see weeds than no weeds. If you have no weeds, you've got a problem.
Yeah. Then you've been blowing too much.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a couple more questions here. This one's from the same person, but they may be related. So let me ask. What about using redwood tree for needles as mulch? And then the second question from the same person is that the tree roots are filling up their vegetable bed area. What can they do? Do they axe to get through them to plant anything? I hope it's not the redwood roots. So
I will say that is a problem because when we're saying cover cropping, we're covering cropping with annuals. We're not cover cropping with perennials. And we've had a client, well, that's actually second client, that their vegetable beds were right next to a boxwood hedge. And the boxwood hedge came underneath, they're in raised beds, came underneath the raised bed and up. And boxwood has a yellow root. It was like a mat in there. You could not get in there. The whole thing was just roots. There was no soil left. And we had to take all the soil out. We had to put a root guard between the boxwood hedge and the raised bed. And that was about a year ago. It was during COVID. It's maybe a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And we're now still, I don't know if we've seen any boxwood back in that bed.
No, it's pretty good.
Okay. But so, yeah, I mean, there can be some competition with some perennials around. And if that's the case, you're probably going to have to, and if you're in a raised bed, you're probably going to have to take that soil out, take all those roots out of there, mix that soil with a little more compost or veggie blend from Lyngso, put it back in, and put a root guard. We put a copper, wasn't it a
mesh? It was a copper mesh root guard.
Copper mesh and down like 2 feet down.
If it's tree roots and it's a mature tree, I wouldn't have an issue cutting them. If it's a young tree, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, although you don't really want a tree next to your raised beds.
Yeah, because it's blocking all your sun anyway.
Yeah, so that's not the best place probably to have it. We didn't talk about sun. If you ever want to see, we have, I think Lyngso's, I'm sure has a link, but we do just a vegetable class. It's not a drought class. And we talk about all that kind of a stuff, like you need sun, a lot of it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but tree roots can be a problem, but trees, like the eucalyptus in my front yard, it had buckled my sidewalk.
Yeah.
And we cut a root, I swear it was like this big.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge tree. It's probably 100 years old and it didn't affect the tree one bit.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, those,
Yeah,
trees have
definitely
lots
there's
of roots.
their competition and planting next to an established tree, especially like redwoods. That's,
Yeah.
you're not going to have a
But
great
the first part of the question, redwood leaves are great for mulch.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to use them.
Yeah.
Oh, well, follow up on that. This person had a client who recently planted a few fruit trees close to their neighbor's redwoods, and they're not growing too well. Any suggestions?
Don't plant them there. I don't know.
One of
Yeah,
those gotta
give 'em-
go.
I mean, the redwoods are gonna suck up as much water as they can, and they're
And
gonna
sunlight.
shade out anything. It's just not a good spot to plant a fruit tree.
Yeah. I mean, also just kind of go look in the forest, like when you're taking a walk and you can see a redwood, and the duff under a redwood sometimes is 2-3 feet. If there's any plants at all, it might be a huckleberry. Maybe outside away from the redwood, you might get some ferns. But things don't grow under redwoods because of all the duff, and you want the duff. The duff is good. It's what's keeping that redwood soil cool and happy and retaining the moisture in the soil. So you don't really want to disturb that.
Yeah, and actually trees, the leaves trees drop, they do it on purpose to feed themselves.
Yeah.
That feeds the soil, that feeds all the microbes in the soil, their leaves dropping, and it's a loop, and it keeps everybody happy.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can wrap up here. All right, last question, because I kind of want to answer this. So this person's neighbor has large oaks. How close can they plant their tomatoes and veggies? Sun is not an issue, and they get plenty of sun.
Are they coast live oak? Let's assume that they're a California native oak. I would stay, gosh, this is kind of hard because you don't want to put so much water on that you're going to hurt the oak.
Yeah.
And the roots from that oak are gonna be going out from the trunk, if it's a mature oak, 25, 30 feet. Although if you're just on one little area where those oak roots are, I think you'd be okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you'd get enough sun if you're planting.
Well, if you're far enough from the canopy
Yeah,
that you're getting sun, you
yeah.
probably don't need to worry about your water hurting that oak.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
Yeah.
That would be my concern, that, you know, it's like you see people put lawns around these beautiful old mature oaks and the oaks die because they've gotten too much water. But if you're
Yeah.
that far from the oak, I think you're fine.
25 feet from the end of the drip line.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
All right, well, I think we can wrap up. Any closing comments that you want to share with the audience here?
Well, thank you to Lyngso's for hosting us and for all the classes you guys host, because you guys host a lot of great classes.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
And
And,
thank you, Can.
you know, water less and observe and see what your plants do.
Yeah, water less, observe more.
And grow your own, because it's less water that California is using.
Yeah, and thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. We know
Yeah.
it's a beautiful day and you probably all want to be out in your gardens.
I know I do.
Same here.
All righty, well, thank you to both of you as always, fabulous class, and we'll see you both again soon, I'm sure.
Thank
Great.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.